Hi everyone, welcome back to She's Crafty Paperworks. If you're new here, I'm Jen, and today we are focusing on making Halloween cards to give as a gift set, and I'm going to be putting them in this gift set box. I picked up a bunch of these from Spellbinders a few years ago, and I can usually get 4, maybe 5 A2 size cards in here. So we're aiming for 4, but if I have room, I will go ahead and make a 5th card. I went ahead and did some pre-die cutting. I've done 4 pumpkins, 4 cats. This is all coming from September 2025 Spellbinder Small Die of the Month. But I also did a few elements that came from the Halloween wreath add-ons, and this is from Suzanne Hugh, and her collection has some really cute, here's a witch's hat, there's some bats in there, and I also did some little candy pieces. So I don't know necessarily how I'm going to use them. I just thought I would, while I was doing the die cutting, I would add these on and see if I can make them useful. Okay, so for this first background, I was thinking I was going to do a spider web background, and I'm going to do this on the orange, and this is the same color orange that I was using for the pumpkins, and then I was thinking we'll do something in the middle here. The colors, by the way, that I'm using, I purchased a Spellbinders fall pack, and most of the colors are going to come from that. I do dabble in a little bit of my Concord and Ninth colors, though, I think in when I was making some of the leaves. I just wanted to point out that my better press is taped up on all the sides, and that's because I hang it on the side of my cart. All right, I'm going to use my VersaFine Clair in Nocturne. That's pretty much my go-to black for everything. I'm just going to tape up the sides now, and my technique for inking better press plates or press plates is just to do a little bit of a wiggle. And I really love the results of this. This is my favorite press plate. When I have a nice background that I'm trying to show off, I usually bring in one of my nesting dies to create a spot for my focal point, and I'll use a contrasting color, and that's where I'll place my die cuts. For this one, I also cut out a piece of craft foam to go behind it. When I'm playing around with my design and I'm starting from scratch, I usually bring in my biggest elements first and then kind of go from there. And this will help me kind of get an idea of my placement, and then I can start bringing in the other pieces that I'd like to bring in and get a feel for how I'll start the gluing process. Now, I will typically change it up a little bit by the time I go to glue it, but I usually have a good sense of how I'm going to place things before I actually do any kind of gluing. For the sentiments, I'll be using some leftover pieces that I cut from a set from Hero Arts. I have stamped and embossed them, and they're stacked on 2 or 3 pieces to get that nice depth. One thing I haven't shown lately on the channel is that I tend to put my logo on the back of my cards, and I also like to finish my cards on the inside by putting a sentiment on the inside that coordinates with the outside sentiment. For the second card, I'm going to blend my own background using Stormy Sky, Wilted Violet, and Victorian Velvet from my Distress Oxide inks. And I'm just going to start off with my Stormy Sky, and I'm kind of creating a moon here by creating a circle with my ink, and I'm just going to kind of go avoid that area as I kind of blend around and saturate it by bringing in that Victorian velvet. That color blends so well with Stormy Sky. I think it's an underrated color. I use it a lot for my florals. For the wilted violet, and it may seem a little jarring here in contrast to the other two colors, which are a little bit more subtle. Once I layer on top of that the Victorian velvet and that Stormy Sky, it will definitely mute it, and it brings it down into the same hue value. And so it's always, even if you think that it might not go well, it's always useful to try to experiment with colors, because I find that when I play around with some of the color combinations that typically I wouldn't put together in kind of other situations, like with cardstock, I can usually get still good blends, especially with my oxides. It's a little hard to tell what I'm doing here, but I am very, very lightly adding that Victorian velvet on top of the moon, particularly around the edges, but with the lightest of touches. Now I'm spraying that with a little bit of water and setting it off to the side just for a second and letting that soak in, and then I'm going to lift that up with a towel and let it dry again. And now I'm taking my Distress Oxides and Black Soot, and I'm going to go around the edges. And you'll see here, I'll get a couple areas where it's a little thick, and it's not necessarily how I would have wanted it to go, but there's always hope when you make these kinds of heavy-handed mistakes. You just bring in that base color that you were using. So in this case, I'm bringing in Stormy Sky, and I'm going to dull what I added. Once that was dry, I cut that down, and then I brought in a little bit of shimmer with my Weathered Wood Distress Spritz. And I'm trying to show you a little bit of that shine here. There we go. And this is the candy that I brought in from that Suzanne Hugh add-on piece for her wreath set from Spellbinders. I opted not to glue the cat in the pumpkin so he can move around. I thought this card was going to be much easier when I started it, but I ended up not liking the color combinations that I chose. And so this changes drastically here in a minute. But let me just kind of tell you about the background and where it came from. And when I replace this background in a minute, it will still have the same origins. And that's from the last video that I made, where we made a whole bunch of different Halloween backgrounds. And this is using a stencil and distress paste in the black opaque and the texture paste. And I did this one in spiders, but I'm going to replace that with one that I had made with bats. And that's only because this was my only spider one left. What I'm doing here is coloring the sentiment, and I just grabbed what was left on the brush, and that was probably carved pumpkin. And because I had embossed it after I inked it, I'm able to then take a towel and shine that back up and remove any ink from that black that was sitting on top. My main problem with the color combination was that I didn't have any of the orange that I used for the pumpkin left. And so I was using what I thought was a close enough orange, but as I was looking at it, it just didn't mesh with me. I just didn't like how they were combining. And so I just removed the pumpkin and left him on the yellow background. And then I switched things up by moving it to a yellow frame and leaving off the orange completely. At this point, I was confident that I would be able to get 5 cards into the gift box. So I decided that one of my cards would be more kind of autumnal inspired versus Halloween. And so with this one, what I am doing is after I embossed it, I am taking Lisa Horton's wax, and this is in gold, and you just put a little bit on your finger. Using your finger works best. You can use a sponge dauber, but I find your finger gives you way more control with this. And I'm just kind of lightly going over the ridges of the indentations from the embossing, and I'm using that to kind of highlight in gold what the image is showing, and it just creates a very nice subtle sheen. And you can go heavy-handed with this, but I find the lighter I go with it, the more I tend to like it. For this card, I opted against putting a sentiment on the outside, but for the inside sentiment, I added the little kitty cat. Since I had originally planned on only making 4 cards, but I had the room to add a 5th card, I needed to go back and make some more die cuts of the September 25 small die of the month club. While I was doing that, I decided that I would do last year's September 24 small die of the month club as well. So what I'm doing is now creating my background. I started with rustic wilderness for the grass, and I brought in chip sapphire, stormy sky, and villainous potion to do my other colors. Now I'm just bringing in Dr. P.H. Martin No Bleed White as my favorite white. And my process for doing this is just to dip my brush into it, saturate the brush tip, and add a little bit of water to it, and then kind of get that fully blended so that it's fully saturated with the water so that I have a better splatter effect. I'm so glad I combined these 2 dyes together. I really like the effect of them. I'll go through and show each of the cards individually here in a second, but I wanted to show you what the gift box looks like first. Having these cards laid out, I just realized that the colors I chose mimic the dahlias sitting on my desk. I don't know if that was a subconscious decision or not. That's interesting. But I really enjoyed this Small Die of the Month Club this year. I love how their September release tends to be both Halloween and fall related. It gives lots of options, and I was able to play around with that with this set. I also really like that this die set really blends well with some of my other dies, and that's important to me because it really helps extend my collection when I can mix and match my pieces. Now tell me, do you do that? Do you typically mix your styles, or do you kind of take them separately? I think part of the reason why I tend to mix mine more readily is that I store them together and in folders. So sometimes they're on the same page together. So that it definitely encourages me to bring out a lot more kind of coordinating of my dies and kind of think differently on how I want to use them. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. If you made it this far, I would appreciate a like and a subscribe. It definitely helps the channel grow, and I appreciate you. I hope you have a wonderful week. Happy Halloween, and I will see you soon.